Welcome back to the show, and we've got a very special guest, a frequent contributor over here on the Junkyard Dawgcast, and that's Olivia Sayer, our Dogs 24/7 intern. And we got a lot to talk about in this segment because Georgia baseball is almost back. The Georgia Bulldogs get started with their season opening series. It starts on Friday, 3 p.m., three-game series against Wright State. And so we're bringing Olivia back on the show to talk about this Georgia baseball team, the expectations, the names to know. Before we get into that, Olivia, first off, thanks for taking the time to come back on. And just how excited are you to get this baseball season going?
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited. A lot of you guys probably know baseball is definitely my favorite sport, even more for college baseball. And I think it's going to be a really good team for Georgia this season. We'll see sort of how it shakes out, but on paper, it's probably one of the most talented teams it's had over the past few years.
And we're going to get into that a little bit as we go through this episode or this segment, but want to kind of start looking big picture at this program. Wes Johnson going into his third year, coming off another successful season for the Bulldogs. They won 43 games for the second straight year. They don't go quite as far in the postseason. They lose in the regional to Oklahoma State. So what's sort of the vibe in your mind with where the program is right now, what Wes has done so far, and what he's looking to accomplish going into year three?
I believe it's in a great spot, and I think this is really Wes's team this year. There were still a few players that he inherited, a few other things that he inherited from the previous regime. Yes, he did build those teams with the transfer portal mostly, but in terms of recruiting classes, this is his group of guys. And then he also went after the portal again. They had the number one class per 64 analytics. And he's really just sort of built this team the same way he built it over his first few seasons, which is through that portal, through those veteran guys, because he really values that experience. So this is an experienced team. It's an older team, which is actually trending that way for a lot of teams in college baseball in terms of they're going older. But yeah, like I said, this is just sort of his team. It's his group of guys. And I think this is the most stacked Georgia team in terms of talent we've seen so far in a few years.
So we'll kind of take turns looking at the pitching, looking at the hitters, but I want to kind of talk more about guys coming back. Who are some of the established names that were on this team last year that fans may hear that name and go, oh yeah, I remember watching him last spring?
Well, there's not many, but the one that sticks out the most is probably Trey Phelps. He's now a junior this year. Could have turned pro last year because of his age, but he decided to come back because he said the way Georgia finished last year is not how he wants to go out. Obviously, that team had a lot of hype around it, it had a lot of talent, and it sort of just faltered off towards the end. And he wants to almost come back and avenge that. And he's also playing third base this year. So last year, he kind of moved around a little bit. His freshman year, he was mainly the designated hitter. And he said, as that designated hitter, he came to the ballpark every day. He sort of knew what his role was, so he could just focus on the hitting. And they're trying to get back to that mindset a little bit this year. So that's why they're sticking him solely at third base. But aside from him, you look at guys like Daniel Jackson. He had an incredible summer in the Cape Cod League, was named one of their all-stars, I believe. And then Brennan Hudson's another one that kind of flew under the radar last year because he was behind Daniel Jackson and Henry Hunter. But he had a good summer as well, and he's come up big for Georgia in times in the past. And then in terms of pitching, there's really not that many guys. Georgia lost its entire starting rotation, but you have Jordan Stevens coming back. He is injured a little bit right now, but threw 100 at times last year, just needs to get that consistency together. And then one guy that's really stood out to the coaching staff is Justin Bird. He also played somewhere during the summer. I forgot the league. It wasn't Cape Cod, but it was something else. And he performed well there. And Wes mentioned as he could be someone that could step into the starting rotation at times. So there's not a lot of guys that are coming back, but the ones that are, they're very impactful.
All right, if we're going to talk about a Wes Johnson team, we got to talk about the pitching. Who are some of the pitchers, Olivia, that you're interested in? Guys that you think, whether they're in the rotation or whether they are coming out of the bullpen, that you think will play really important roles for this Georgia team?
The first is Kenny Ishikawa. He's a transfer from Seattle, originally from Japan, and he's actually a two-way player. And I went to a lot of fall scrimmages during the fall. There was not one scrimmage that I walked out of it unimpressed by the way he played, whether it was on the mound, whether it was in the batter's box. Really all-around player. He was consistent on the mound. He's not going to throw that 100, 101 even miles an hour that are what show up on the highlight reels, but he gets the job done. So I think he's going to be a fun one to watch. The one that's garnering a bunch of the highlights and a bunch of the attention is Joey Volshko. He is a transfer from Stanford along with his teammate Matt Scott, was very highly ranked, and he throws 100. And Wes has worked with him on a lot of sort of mechanical things during the fall, so he's had a couple of up and down performances, but now he's at that point where he really has those adjustments. And so you're starting to see that consistency build with him, because there's no doubt he's talented. He wouldn't be ranked as high as he is if he's not talented, even on MLB draft boards. But it was just really the consistency for him at Stanford, and I think the tweaks that Wes has done with him can help build that up a little bit. Aside from him, Dylan Vighu's a transfer pitcher from Michigan who has a lot of, I guess, hype around him. Like I mentioned earlier, Matt Scott, who was Joey's teammate at Stanford. And then there's just so many other guys. Bradley Stewart is another one that I didn't mention earlier. He's a left-hander. He's coming back from an injury, had some really good practices in fall. So there's a bunch of guys within this pitching staff.
Yeah, can't wait to watch once this season gets started, how they kind of figure out the roles, who winds up doing what, because non-conference play, that's such a big part, sort of figuring out everybody's role. All right, let's talk about the hitters. You already talked about Trey Phelps. Who are some of the other guys that you think will be key components to this offense and who will be out in the field?
I think Daniel Jackson will. Him, along with Jack Archimone, who transferred over from Richmond, are going to be the main two behind the plate, and then you'll see Brennan Hudson in there as well. But even if they're not behind the plate, Wes plays everyone all over. Colby Branch is going to – I completely forgot about Colby Branch, who's coming back as well. He's a big one. But Colby Branch is going to be at short. Trey Phelps is going to be at third. Everyone else is probably going to be scattered all over the field. But Daniel Jackson, Jack Archimone, Brennan Hudson, Kenny, who I just talked about – Jordy Oriach has a really cool story. He actually almost had to quit baseball in high school due to just some family moving stuff, but stuck with it, got an offer to play, eventually ended up at Georgia, and so he's supposed to be a big bat in the outfield as well. Bryce Callaway is another interesting one. He's a two-way player, transferred in from New Orleans along with Grant Edwards, but he has a really big bat, and the biggest thing that I think you're going to see from these hitters is I don't think they're going to strike out as much. Wes and his coaching staff really prioritize that in the portal. They got guys with high walk rates and low strikeout rates because that was one of their biggest problems last year. And so I don't know if this team is necessarily going to hit as many home runs, but I think you're going to see more consistency at the plate in terms of those walks and those strikeouts.
So just a little bit earlier, as we're recording this on Friday, earlier this week, the SEC coaches put out their picks for the preseason. Georgia 9th. Olivia, was that surprising at all to you? And I'll kind of follow that with, when you look at the SEC, who do you see as those top teams that Georgia's got to compete with?
It was surprising, but at the same time, it really wasn't. And I'll have a story on this out sometime, probably over the weekend, on why this is the case. But just to keep a brief version of it, I've said it many times. I think this Georgia team is talented. I think it might be one of the most talented ones in college baseball in terms of what they have on paper. But with that being said, the SEC this year is completely stacked. So I wasn't necessarily that surprised that they were ranked 9th. I probably would have put them a little bit higher. But when you look at some of the other teams in the conference, I think Texas is a really big one. I still don't like the way they went about that whole coaching change a couple of years ago, but there's no denying that Jim is an incredible coach. We saw it last year. Georgia was actually on the receiving end of how good of a coach he was last year with that series in Austin. But I think they're going to be good. I think Tennessee behind Josh Elander is going to be really good, even though they did lose Vitello to MLB. I love that they stuck in-house. They brought all their guys back. Good recruiting class. Didn't really lose that many, so I think they're another team to watch. Florida is going to be an interesting one because they lost a little bit of guys, but they were also so injured last year that they couldn't really do anything. Their hands were tied almost. So I think they're going to be another one to look out for. Texas A&M, they kept Michael Early. The team says they love him. The program says they love him. I actually talked with one of their former players over the summer a little bit, and he seemed really bought into them. So I think they're going to bounce back a little bit. And then Mississippi State is the other one I'm looking at. Whole new regime. We all know they have the facilities in place. That school buys into its baseball program. And now with the right guy leading the way, I think they could do some stuff. And then Arkansas and LSU as well are the other two. I'm trying to think. Probably those two. Those are just consistent. They've always been consistent. They're always probably going to be consistent. So it's a really loaded conference.
We could definitely talk about all 16 teams just because, it's kind of cliche, but you look at really all the major sports, it is so deep within the conference, and the margin for error, as the men's basketball team is learning, is so very small, and I expect it to be the same with baseball. Well, I talked about it, Olivia, a few minutes ago with the start of non-conference play, the next month and change. The team is figuring out a lot of things with the lineups that they like and the pitching rotations. But what are the big questions for you? What are 2 or 3 things that you say I really want to watch as this season gets started to learn about this team and to get a feel for what this team will be once we're talking about SEC play?
You just alluded to it, but my biggest question is how this rotation is going to shake out because there are so many guys that could fill into what at the end of the day is only a 3-man or 4-man rotation. And so I think just figuring out how they're going to slide into those roles, and we saw it over the past 2 seasons. Georgia's starting rotation for Wright State is not going to be its starting rotation for the SEC tournament or for LSU Auburn, whoever they end the season with. And so I think just seeing how that develops over this non-conference play will be interesting. The second one is going to be how this lineup sort of fits in because last year, guys found their roles in the lineup. They did shuffle it a little bit, but there was a stretch there where you could pencil in almost 1 through 9, 1 or 2 options of who you knew they were going to be. So I think just figuring out how that shakes up. And then my third question is, how is this team going to gel together? How quickly are they going to gel together? The thing about Georgia's non-conference slate this season is it's really not that hard. You have Wright State, who made the tournament last year. You have Georgia Tech in Truist Park, which should be a fun one, as per usual. But aside from that, there's no Clemson. You got a couple of in-states, and you only have, aside from the one against Tech, you only have 1 game away from Foley Field. So this team is really not going to be tested until the conference play begins, and even then, you're opening up at home. But the conference slate of this team's schedule is really challenging. So I think the biggest question is going to be how well can the team adjust to that?
Olivia, you do a great job covering Georgia baseball for us. Anything else we should be on the lookout for with this team or anything we didn't talk about?
Not really that I can think of. I think it's going to be a really good team. I think it's going to be a really fun team. You're probably going to see some of the dramatic stuff that you've seen, whether it's the jersey is unbuttoned, the bat flips, stuff that makes college baseball college baseball. So I don't think that's going anywhere, but it's really just going to be how does this team shake out once the games actually start? Because as I've said, they're talented. They have the pitchers. They have the hitters. Now it's just if they can put it all together.
Super excited to get this season going and super excited to follow your coverage. Highly recommend it if you're watching or listening to this. Olivia does a great job, and she will have the Diamond Dogs covered for us over on Dogs 24/7.